Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 3 of an exciting new series. What if Deku became the most feared villain? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Toast the Spaghetti in the Oven on archiveofourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Izuku chucked an old TV remote and it shattered into a million pieces upon hitting a fridge. He would be happy that there was such an improvement in his strength if it wasn't for the fact that the remote was practically disintegrating in his hand. Izuku picked up a microwave and carried it up the beach to its pile. Each time he cleaned, the piles kept getting farther and farther away as he moved further down the beach. Izuku stood next to a pile of appliances as he admired his work. Almost a year in, and he's got a little more than half of the beach done. He looked out onto the water and at the cleaned half of the beach and smiled. He wasn't doing this out of the kindness of his heart, but it sure did feel good to see something so beautiful finally rid of the trash infecting it. The sun was setting, so he figured he'd call it quits for the day. Grabbing his bag, he snuck into a gym to use one of their showers. He changed into his vigilante hoodie and pants, then walked home to get the rest of his gear and drop off his bag. He put on his new black and white checkered mask. He had designed it himself with ventilation in it to make it easier to breathe, while still being no bigger than the surgical masks he was wearing. It sat snug but tight on his face as Izuku climbed onto a rooftop and just started running. His legs moving on their own, he picked up speed. Void of any hesitation and rapidly approaching the ledge, Izuku leaped. Jumping from one roof to the next, his hood blew off, so he took off his beanie as well. His hair flowed in the wind as he flew through the air. The feeling of freedom was just too addicting, until his hair whipped around and covered his eyes, causing him to slip and almost plummet to the ground. Luckily, he caught himself and pulled his small body up onto the building. He sat on the roof, brushing back his hair with his fingers. His hair was long and shaggy, but not yet reaching his shoulders. He went for a hair tie around his wrist, but realized he had forgotten them. He ran his fingers through his hair as he brushed it back and out of his face again. It was such a pain, but although he could just take a pair of scissors to it, he didn't want to. Something about having long hair is so liberating and just gives him this sense of freedom. Footsteps sounded on the roof behind him, and Izuku quickly threw on his beanie. Eraserhead jumped over and walked around to face him. "Oh, Nightwalker, it's just you," Eraser said as his shoulders visibly dropped. Izuku leaned back on his hands and looked up at him. "Who do you think it was?" "Thought it was a kid up here." "Why would a kid be up here?" "I don't know. Why are you up here?" "Touché," Izuku said as he squinted his eyes at the hero. He shrugged his shoulders as he laid down on his back, hands supporting the back of his head. "I don't know, just taking a break, I guess." Eraser sat down next to him and tossed a jelly pouch onto his stomach. Without completely taking off his mask, he slid it underneath and began drinking it. It was quiet, and Izuku had to admit he liked it. The silence, but not being completely alone for once, was nice. Eraser took in a breath, as if to speak, but an empty jelly pouch hit his face before anything came out. "Shut up." Eraser crumpled up the empty pouch and put it in his pocket. "I haven't said anything yet, but you were about to." "Just don't," Izuku said, firmly stating the last word. "You're going to ruin it." "Ruin what?" Eraser asked, confused. "Doesn't matter. Just give me a few more minutes before it all falls to pieces." Eraser was seriously confused. What was the kid talking about? Did he know what he was going to say? What he was thinking? The last time he brought this up, it didn't go exactly well, so maybe the kid did know. Quirk, maybe? Izuku debated even answering any of the questions he was about to ask, but he just wanted the company for a little longer. If it does end up going south like he sort of expects it to, then he'll just run. Izuku took a deep breath followed by a long exhale. "Okay, what is it?" he said in a monotone voice. Eraser went to speak, but Izuku put up his hand just before any words escaped. "I'm only answering a few, so make it count. I wanted to make a proposal." He paused, anticipating being stopped. "I'm not just a hero. I do have another job during the day. You're a teacher. You teach the 1A hero course at UA. What about it?" Izuku said, bored. Eraser was just a little surprised. "Yeah. How did you know that?" "It's public knowledge." All the teachers and staff are listed on the UA website. Eraser nodded along, but something clicked as he remembered. That doesn't answer how you know about me. Only pictures and hero names of public heroes are shown. None of my information is on the website. Eraser looked over to Izuku, still lying on the floor next to him. What else do you know? Izuku's eyes stared off into nothingness as he began recalling the information he had gathered about the hero. Shoyuta Aizawa, age 30. Quirk, erase. Can erase anyone's quirk by looking at them. Pros. Essentially fights quirkless, but quirk evens the playing field. Cons. Doesn't work on mutant-type quirks, can only erase one quirk at a time. Field of vision can't be blocked. Although recommended to cut his hair or wear a hair tie, hair has adapted to quirk and floats out of the way of eyes. Hair is also a dead giveaway for when the quirk is activated. Fights with minimal weapons such as a couple of knives and a capture scarf that is embedded with DNA that allows it to act abnormally. The scarf is basically a third arm. Izuku looked over at a surprised Aizawa. That's just the basic stuff with a little analysis written in. Izuku paused, then asked, "You want to hear your background?" The hero hesitated, scared about what the kid knew about him, but was curious about what he actually did find out about him. He wasn't All Might, so there wasn't much to find, and he'd also lived a pretty boring life considering the hero route he took. So, what does he know? Aizawa gave a nod and a hesitant sure. Now correct me if I'm wrong. Your mother left while you were young, so for a while it was just you, your older sister, and your father. He eventually remarried when you were in middle school. Izuku looked over at Aizawa, and he nodded. You didn't always want to be a hero. Something happened when you were younger. Some accident you wished you could have prevented. Originally, you were aiming for the public and spotlight, but after the death of your friend, Shirakumo, you opted for underground, which all in all is the better option for you. A few years after graduating and being a full-fledged hero, someone, I'm assuming a friend or Nizu himself, told you you'd make a great teacher. Now you teach the hero course. You're unmarried and have no kids, but that doesn't seem like something you are actively looking for at the moment. Izuku looked over at Aizawa and nodded. That's it for now. Anything wrong? He asked. Aizawa was shocked. None of that was available to the public or known by anyone really for that matter. How much digging did this kid do? How did he even find this information? Luckily, it looks like the lengths Nizu and he went through to hide Shinso worked. If the kid was able to dig up all this information on him, he was a little surprised he didn't find him registered as Shinso's guardian. Aizawa hesitated telling him the truth for only a split second before deciding it was better for both of their safeties if Shinso continued to go unnoticed. Aizawa nodded. No, it's all right. How did you find all this out? Izuku shrugged his shoulders. It was relatively easy. I just looked you up online. There was literally no way that was true. None of this is available to just search online. Kid's quirk, maybe? Hopefully. Aizawa felt a little sweat fall down his forehead. So this proposal? Izuku spoke up, changing the subject only to regret it. Yes, Aizawa said, getting knocked out of his thoughts. Kid, you demonstrate a lot of potential. More potential than a lot of the students I've taught, and especially more than this year's class. I wanted to ask you to join my class. Aizawa looked over to Izuku, who was now sitting up with his legs crossed. Izuku was staring at him curiously, so Aizawa continued. This year everyone was expelled, so you'd be the only one in my class. You can do that? Izuku asked. There is no point in teaching you and showing you how to become a hero if you don't even show the potential. The point is to guide future heroes, not train future corpses. Aizawa could almost see in his eyes what Izuku was going to say and beat him to it. Quirk has nothing to do with potential. Those with strong quirks half of the time show no potential at all. I often expel most of my class, but this year, it just happened to be all of them. They both sat in silence as Izuku actually contemplated his answer. Kid, I don't know your exact age. How you could long since have graduated or not yet made it to high school. I do know one thing, though, this class is the right place for you. Kid, you're a great hero in the workings. Izuku got up and started pacing, which led to him then walking circles around Aizawa, who was still sitting on the ground. His hand was on his chin, as it looked like he subconsciously paced around Aizawa. I know I could help you hone those skills and make you an even better hero. Izuku instantly stopped walking. No, Aizawa twisted his upper body to face Izuku, who was standing behind him. His eyes showed this emptiness in them, but this sadness as well. Aizawa looked up at him confused. I don't want to be a hero. Izuku started to walk off, but Aizawa quickly got up and gently grabbed onto his shoulder. Izuku shrugged off his hand. Wait, kid. Izuku turned halfway and looked up at Aizawa and said with a quiet voice, There's nothing more to talk about. I don't want to be a hero and will never want to be a hero. He started walking again, but Aizawa grabbed onto his wrist before he could get far. Izuku pulled away immediately, but Aizawa didn't let go. Kid, just hold on. Let go, sir, please. Izuku's almost silent voice quivered. Izuku pulled again and tried to push on Aizawa's hand to try and get out of the loose grasp. But the hero knew if he let go, the kid would bolt as far away as he could. Izuku tried to pull away and kept asking for the hero to let him go. But he was so quiet and his voice trembled so much the hero couldn't hear him. Memories were rising and coming to the front of his mind as he desperately tried to free himself. He eventually started to plead and beg until Izuku began crying out, Please, Papa, I'm sorry. It was only then that Aizawa truly saw the panic in the vigilante's eyes and finally let him go. Aizawa took a few steps back as he watched Izuku curling on himself. I'm so sorry. It didn't take long for Izuku to turn and run as fast as he could away. Aizawa didn't even go after him, too ashamed of himself to even move. Izuku held onto his mother as she hugged him. They just sat on the couch watching something on the TV. It was too blurry to tell what was playing, but it didn't matter because his mother was here. Inko pet his hair, running her hands through his curls as they relaxed on the couch, and a giant smile grew across his face as his eyes began to shut. He didn't feel hungry, he didn't feel exhausted, he was safe inside, relaxed, and it was peaceful. His mother was here, and everything was okay again. The petting suddenly stopped, and Izuku could no longer feel his mother. Falling face first into the cushions of the sofa, he looked up to see his father dragging Inko away by her arm as she screamed for help. Izuku couldn't move as if he was glued to the couch. He could only watch as his father threw her to the floor, and she went up in flames. Hisashi stepped through the fire and came right up to Izuku's face and pushed his finger into his CHSD. Your mother is suffering because of you, Hisashi yelled at him. Ripping Izuku from the couch and picking him up by his shirt, Hisashi threw him at the burnt corpse of his mother. She's dead, and it's all your fault. Izuku couldn't say anything. He couldn't cry or scream, never being capable of doing anything because of his stupid, weak, quirkless body. But watch, he stared at her. All he could do was feel the flames coming off the shell of his mother as he watched her burn. Izuku jolted awake and sat up in his cocoon of a bed. His hair, damp from sweat, stuck to his forehead. He frantically looked around in the dark. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he did feel at ease for not finding anything. He got up from his makeshift bed and dragged himself over to the door. Leaning on it to push it open, sunlight poured in as the door slowly widened. The sun was just rising, and Izuku realized he had woken up early today. Standing outside, he wiped the sleep from his eyes as the wind blew around his messy hair, causing Izuku to brush it back with his fingers and tie it off with a hair tie he saw sitting on the ground. The corner of his mouth perked up as Izuku squinted at the sun. Today felt like it wasn't going to be bad, but things never went well for him. The memories of last night and of Eraserhead came suddenly rushing into his mind, and a chill ran through Izuku's body. His body physically shook for a second as the thought of his dad standing over his burning mother plagued his mind. She's dead, and it's all your fault, Izuku heard his father say. Izuku's hands tightly wrapped around the hem of his shirt as he hung his head and glared at his feet. He pulled his shirt forward in frustration until releasing it and holding his hands open and spread out. He closed his eyes and took a breath. Opening his eyes, Izuku stared at the sun, then flipped it off. F off, you bastard, Izuku said before changing into one of his more comfortable, looser suits. Doing something productive should get him out of his head. Izuku checked the address written on the corner of his notebook as he threw a black suit jacket on and stuffed it with an assortment of blades. Holding the mask and a flat cap between one of his arms, Izuku stuffed his hands into his pockets and wandered down the street. He'd been meaning to get this job done, but his feet were taking him somewhere else first. Through the gate, cutting through the grass instead of following the gravel road, until he finally looked up to see himself walking toward an all-too-familiar rock and a tombstone. Izuku rested his hand on the top of his mother's name, then his whole head. Laying against the cold stone, Izuku could only think of his father, which brought a frown to his face. The bastard didn't deserve the space he occupied in his mind, and he definitely didn't deserve it now, of all times. Izuku tried to rid himself of him, but there his father was. "She's dead, and it's all your fault. All your fault. Your fault." Izuku bumped his head against the stone, tears slowly rolling down his face. His lip wobbled and voice shaking. "Mom, make him stop. Make him go away." Izuku brought his legs to his chest as he laid against the gravestone of his mother. A quiet sob escaped him. Hours had passed when Izuku finally decided to get up. Izuku kissed his hand and touched her name. He brushed himself off and sauntered out of the cemetery, this time taking every road until he was eventually outside of the giant gate. Pausing for a second, he stared into the gate before walking away. Picking up speed, he widened his strides as he made his way to the location of his job for the day. When he was about a block away, he slipped on his mask. Walking up to the door of an extremely run-down house, Izuku turned the knob and walked right in. It smelled of cigarettes and idiocy, the scent only getting stronger as he followed it to an open room filled with a group of guys no older than 30. The group of unkempt men was none other than the gang known as Rats. They were all huddled around a bunch of boxes pushed together, with an empty pizza box sitting on top of them. Izuku walked closer and into the light, avoiding the bottles and cigarette butts strewn across the floor. One of the men sat up and pointed at him. Who invited this kid? This prompted all of them to then look at him. They had hired him a couple weeks back to kill a detective that was trying to gather evidence so he could arrest them. Izuku usually wouldn't involve himself with such groups, especially for foolish acts like this, but he also didn't like the detective. He originally was just going to call it a day after killing the guy and letting the group get caught because of it. You don't kill the guy investigating you, or it just makes you even more suspicious. But Izuku was only reminded why he doesn't work with groups like them, and it's because he still hasn't gotten paid for it. He gives everyone a week. Some pay him right after seeing the photo he sends them, some after seeing it on the news, and others need a few days to scrounge up the money. It's been 2 weeks, and Izuku doesn't want to risk the police and heroes catching them before he gets his money. The group is all talking to each other mainly about him and who invited their kid brother when Izuku holds out his hand. 5,000 comes the deep voice of his mask. They all stopped at hearing the amount, but then erupted in laughter. "Go home, kid, before you get hurt." Izuku's hand was still held out. "My money, hand it over." A few of them went quiet as they whispered to each other. "Is it really the Reaper? The smiling Reaper? No way. It could be. No one's actually seen him." They looked at each other. One of them looked at the rest as if they were all idiots. "It's just a kid," he said as he got up and stomped over to Izuku. He began reaching for his mask, to which Izuku kicked the dude's shin. When the guy keeled over, Izuku grabbed his shirt and pulled the guy down, meeting his face with his knee. The guy fell to the ground, which caused the rest of them to stand and start making their way to Izuku. Suddenly, they seemed to be getting farther away and spinning no less. Or was he spinning? What was happening? Quirk? Izuku started to wobble and sway. Stumbling, he realized one of his legs was stuck. Looking down at the guy he thought knocked out early was holding on to him. He was doing this to him. He tried to wriggle himself out of the hold, but didn't even know if he was moving. Sharp pain erupted on the side of his head. Izuku wobbled as he tried to keep himself up straight, but soon felt himself floating toward the floor, his side aching after hitting the ground without bracing. Damn it, he knew he was way too distracted to be doing anything today. His vision went black. Izuku opened his eyes, and his vision slowly focused. The sound of arguing flooded his ears as the group was divided between two sides of the room. "He needs to die," one of the guys yelled to the other side of the room. His nose was bleeding and looked crooked. "He's just a kid. He looks no older than 10. Still has baby cheeks. One guy yelled from the other half of the room. Baby cheeks? Izuku puffed out his cheeks as he looked around only to meet eyes with his mask. Shit, he wondered why his face felt lighter. A smile stared into him as the guy wearing it walked closer to him. He flicked Izuku on the forehead as if he was just some brat, then called to the rest that he had woken up. All heads turned toward him, so Izuku straightened up. His suit jacket was still on, and he could feel the weight of his weapons. Apparently, Izuku underestimated how much of an idiot they all were. He rubbed his hands together behind the chair, accessing the tightness of the rope around his wrist. Tighter than he expected from the lot, but still not tight enough. Feels like hesitation tied his ropes. A few of the guys walked closer to him. The guy with the bloody nose leaned in, grabbing the back of the chair. Izuku turned away from him, trying not to look at his face as he squeezed his eyes shut. The dude's breath stank, and it really helped get him in character as the scared little boy. You're scaring him, dude. Back up. One of the guys tried to pull him away from Izuku, but the one with the bloody nose just pushed the other away. He then reeled back and sent a fist right into the stomach of Izuku, holding the chair so he didn't move. Izuku lurched forward and pretended to dry heave. Grabbing the hair from the back of his head, the guy pulled Izuku's head back, looked him in the eye, then slammed his face down onto his knee. Izuku's head hung as drops of blood splattered to the floor. Teardrops soon accompanied them, and apologies spilled out. I'm so sorry, mister. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. He just said to not let anyone take the mask. Please let me go. I'm so sorry. He said to get his money. Please, mister. I'm so sorry. Izuku spit out, trying to sound as hopeless as he could as fake tears ran down his face. He shook his head, clenched his teeth, and tried to look as scared as he could. Some of the other guys started whispering and telling the one with the bloody nose to pull away, but he refused, punching Izuku in the gut again as he yelled, You're sorry now, you damn brat. You broke my nose, and now you're sorry. He pulled Izuku's head back, blood dripping from his nose. A wide grin stretching from ear to ear, showcasing his blood-stained teeth spread across Izuku's face. The man tightened his grip at the sudden change as a wave of fear washed over him. Izuku tapped his heel to the leg of the chair, and a small blade shot out of the tip of his shoe. His crying quickly turned into laughter as he kicked the shin of the bloody nose guy holding his head. As the blade stuck into his leg, Izuku's hand shot out from behind the chair, and he stuck his thumbs into the eye sockets of the guy. Izuku then swiftly got up, kicking the chair back as he pulled his foot blade out of the guy's leg. Izuku kicked the man's legs as hard as he could, then pushed his CHSD. Izuku stepped on his CHSD after watching him tumble to the ground. Izuku drove the blade into the bottom of his chin, then again and again, finally stopping long after the man had stopped moving. Izuku stepped off of him and clicked his heel to the other. Rubbing his wrist, his head flopped to one side as laughter escaped from his mouth. They all looked at each other. Faces of both fear and confusion permeated the room. A yell filled the room as one of the men ran toward Izuku with a spike sticking out of his knuckles. Izuku, ceasing the laughter, simply pushed the man's hand out of the way and pierced his CHSD with a knife from his jacket. Resembling that of a ragdoll, the man collapsed to the ground. Before anyone managed the same courage, Izuku ran toward the group, jumping on the closest guy and driving his blade into the top of his head. Pushing off of him, the body fell onto those standing behind him and caused some to fall like dominoes. Izuku swung the blade, and blood splattered to the ground. Only then did they start rushing at Izuku, suddenly aware that he was a threat 3 dead bodies later. Izuku stepped over all the bodies, making his way to the front door. The floor creaked on the other side of the room. Izuku swung his head around, only to be faced with a petrified man carefully holding his mask. The man quickly went into a bow and held Izuku's mask out in front of him. Izuku took it from his shaky hands. Thanks, almost forgot this. He walked away and heard the guy hit the ground behind him. Passing the living room, he found his hat laying on the couch. Izuku slipped on his hat as he walked down the hallway to the door. Stepping outside, he stretched and took a deep breath of the fresh air. He could really go for some tea right now. So he walked until he was standing outside a familiar bar. Putting on his mask, he entered and sat down. Captain? A surprised voice came from next to him. Izuku looked over to see twice. His mask was pushed up to uncover his mouth as he was sipping his drink from a bendy straw. That's when Dabi walked over and was just as surprised to see him as twice. "What? You make good tea, and that's exactly what I need at the moment." Izuku pretended not to notice the pink show up on Dabi's cheeks before he turned away and began preparing his drink. A few minutes later, a scarred hand placed a steaming cup in front of him. Izuku lifted his mask and took a long sip and quickly felt at ease. The cat finally caught the rat. "Tom got Jerry," twice said out of random. When Dabi looked at him confused, he pointed at the TV attached to the wall behind Dabi. All three looked at the screen to see a woman talking to the camera with a run-down house behind her. Dabi reached up, pressing on the corner of the TV, unmuted it, then leaned back against the bar. Rat's member turned himself into the police after the death of fellow gang members. "The police were called to the house you see behind me." Upon arrival, the police walked into the house and found at least 20 dead of the supposed Rats gang. One member who was left alive but severely injured quickly surrendered and was taken into custody. Police stated that upon being escorted out of the house, the remaining member muttered one word: "Reaper." Shortly after, however, collapsed and died on the way to the hospital. Police were... Dabi reached up and muted the TV, the woman continuing to talk, unaware she wasn't being heard. "Well, that explains the blood," Dabi said, turning around and looking at Izuku. "What blood?" Dabi pointed to Izuku's shirt. He looked down to see red splattered on his white button-up, as well as a part of his jacket torn. "Damn, I've got to get another suit replaced." Twice flipped off the TV. "Damn rats and the cats." Aizawa took out the vibrating phone from his pocket. "What's up? Have you seen the news yet? The entire Rats gang is dead," Kacchan said before even hearing a response. "Gang war?" Aizawa asked on the other end. "That's what I thought at first." "At first? I was investigating the murder of a detective because his wounds looked familiar," Kacchan answered. "Then how the hell did you end up at the doorstep of the dead Rats gang?" Aizawa asked. "I was just getting to that." Kacchan paused. Said detective was investigating the gang and almost had them all in custody before being murdered. Both have similar wounds, so whoever they hired came back to kill them. Why help them only to kill them later? Wanted more money? Maybe. Kacchan shrugged his shoulders. It was silent for a second before a realization dawned on Aizawa. "You said the wounds on the detective looked familiar before even seeing the rats." The detective smiled. "We thought the hero killer was breaking his pattern, but he wouldn't go as far to kill a detective. There's just no need or reason for it. Whoever killed the detective has been killing all these heroes." There was silence on the other end of the phone. "I think we have a killer for hire." Izuku jumped. "For real?" He jumped. Granted, the sand was soft and the fridge wasn't that tall, but he jumped. The fridge was properly standing next to the other large kitchen appliances, which consisted of a microwave. The fridge took him literal days to push, so he figured the stove he had his eyes on next was going to be about the same. So much sand has never been eaten by him before this week, which was due to the sheer amount of times he face-planted just trying to push the fridge. The sun was just above the water, so Izuku took that as a sign to call it a day. He walked home to throw on his Nightwalker garb, then took to the roofs. He heard something a few buildings over. A scream or a scuffle, something of the sort that was too normalized for this line of work. He popped his head down into the alley and found a man being pinned against the wall by another. Izuku's cheeks went a little red, and he was about to look away and give them their privacy, when something sharp caught his eye. Was that an icicle being held to his throat? Taking a closer look, only then did Izuku see the fear in the man's eyes. Izuku quietly hopped down using the fire escape and simply walked up to the icicle man and pulled him off the other by his hood. Now that he was facing him and got a good look, it was indeed an icicle he was holding. "What the F? Who are you?" Icicle man asked. Izuku held up a finger to him. "Hold that thought. I'll get to you in a second." Izuku turned to the man who was being threatened by the icicle, who was now sitting on the ground hugging himself. He clapped his hands together to get his attention and bent down. "If you care about your well-being, because quite frankly I don't. Move!" The icicle man started rushing toward him before Izuku could even finish. The icicle was being held over his head as he ran toward Izuku. He brought it down on him, but Izuku stepped back and to the side. Icicle Man instantly pivoted and swung the icicle in his direction. Izuku, catching his hand, swiftly equipped a knife from his belt and dragged the tip up the man's arm, wrist to elbow, then pushed him back and away. "Patient much. I said I'd get to you in a second." Although merely a flesh wound, the sudden pain caused Icicle Man to drop his icicle as blood dripped down his arm. Izuku faced the man sitting on the ground, but he had already made his way to the end of the alley. Izuku shrugged his shoulders. "That works, I guess." Izuku turned back to Icicle Man. An icicle was now forming from one of his palms, which he then broke off with his other hand. Something seemed off, so he simply watched as another icicle was produced from the man's palm. He seemed ready to run at Izuku when his icicle suddenly melted. Confused, he tried producing another, but nothing. Flexing his hands again and again, but no results. He looked up at Izuku, who just shrugged and sheathed his knife. Izuku spun around and walked away. "Where are you going, punk? And what did you do to my quirk?" Icicle Man yelled. "You're boring. Not worthy of dulling my knives." Izuku stretched his arms and interlocked his fingers behind his head as he continued to walk away. Walking past the man sitting on the ground still hugging himself, Izuku turned out of the alley and left. Walking some ways down the street, Izuku eventually found another fire escape, climbed it, and jumped multiple roofs over. He sat down and swung his legs over the edge as he listened to the sirens. "Hey, Eraser," Izuku said to the footsteps he heard behind him. Eraserhead, leaving a large gap between them, sat down next to him. "Hey, kid," Aizawa spoke softly. "How'd you know it was me?" He was only a little curious and really was just trying to start a conversation with the vigilante. "Just now, or back there?" Izuku didn't look at the hero, just stared out into the city. "Either or." Izuku was quiet as he spoke. "Everyone else is so loud, except you, so I tend to listen for you." Izuku pointed a thumb behind him. "I figured it was you back there when his quirk stopped working." "That's a no-brainer. Why'd you walk away then?" Quirk disabled, he didn't seem like much of a fighter. "I already knew that going in. I was just curious what he was holding, so I found out then left." He already was dull, but quirk disabled made him boring. Aizawa didn't know how to respond to that. The kid didn't see the guy as fun, so he walked away. Both stared out into the city, and silence surrounded them. Aizawa saw him moving next to him as Izuku got up and started walking away. Aizawa didn't hear him at all, which sent chills down his spine, even though he didn't like to admit that. The kid was right next to him, and yet made no sound. The hero got up as well, but didn't move toward the vigilante. "Kid, could you hold on?" Izuku continued walking. "I'm sorry, Nightwalker." Izuku stopped, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry for last time. I shouldn't have held on to you like that. I'm sorry for not listening, and I should have let go." "You're fine." Izuku didn't move, but was ready to walk away at any moment. "No, kid, it's not fine. I'm sorry I pushed and in turn ignored you. I'm sorry. I forgive you." Izuku was facing him. He walked back over to the edge and sat down, wiping his eyes with his sleeve before Eraser could see. The hero sat down as well and handed him a juice pouch, holding it until the kid took it. Time passed while they sat in silence. Then a scream sent them both running. They landed to see a woman pushing a man away from her and hitting him with her purse. Aizawa shot out his scarf and quickly subdued the criminal. "Kid, silence." "Nightwalker?" Eraserhead looked behind him, then around, but Izuku was nowhere to be seen. "I don't know if you can hear me or have long since left." Aizawa projected his voice, but didn't quite yell. "I'm not forcing you, but my offer still stands, and I'd be happy to have you in my class." Aizawa looked up to see Izuku jumping over from one roof to another. Izuku had a small smile on his face as he jumped home. Shoyuta walked into the living room and tied back his hair into a bun. Getting to work, he pushed the furniture back, creating more of an open space. He was starting to lay down the mats when Shinso walked in wearing a pair of sweats and a black shirt that said, "Hang in there," with a cat underneath it. Joining him in getting the room ready, Shinso grabbed the cushions from the couches and threw them around the mats. Bare feet stepped onto the mats and faced each other. "Can I get some water first?" Shinso asked. Shoyuta answered with a fist. Shinso jumped to the side and lunged at Shoyuta with his own fist. He shoved the incoming hand away and kicked the kid's legs, causing him to tumble to the ground. Shinso quickly popped back up and ran toward him. He went to dodge him, but Shinso quickly dropped and kicked his legs out from under him. But Shoyuta wasn't about to go down that easily. Twisting himself, he landed on his hands and grabbed Shinso with his legs. Pinned down, Shinso went to open his mouth, but closed it upon seeing Shuta's eyes flash red. Not seeing an escape, Shinso tapped Shuta's leg, resulting in him immediately freeing him. Shoyuta got up and held out a hand for his kid. "So, is this what I'm supposed to expect from the entrance exam?" Shinso said with a sly smile. Shuta's hair rose ever so slightly and his eyes glowed red as he pulled him up to his feet. He sighed but gave him a smirk. "Kid, I already told you I'm not allowed to say." That was only partially true. Shoyuta was assigned to the regular exams this year instead of the recommendation exam, so he actually had no clue what Niza had planned for them. He gave Shinso a look before turning his quirk off, the bun on the back of his head now sitting just a bit lower. "Yeah, you said that?" Shinso said as he tried to stretch his shoulder, moving his arm in a circular motion. "Can't you at least tell me what they did in the previous years?" "Kid, I? Please, Shoyuta." Shinso stared at him, hands clasped together, mouthing the word "please" over and over. Shoyuta watched him silently, holding the bridge of his nose until he broke. Okay. Cut it out, fine." Shinso's fist bumped the air in triumph. This kid was making him soft. Was he the only one? He knew very little, but there were two things that usually never change. Shoyuta held up a finger. "Expect to fight someone?" He put up another finger. "Every student gets individually interviewed at the end of the exam. That's all I'm telling you." "Interviewed about what?" "All I'm telling you." Shoyuta leveled him with a glare, telling him he was done and moving on. Shoyuta readied himself in a lower stance, which made Shinso do the same. Shinso dropped and lunged at the hero. "Worth a shot," Shinso whispered as Shoyuta jumped out of the way and over him without much trouble. Shinso rolled and popped up, immediately hitting Shuta's fist away, but was knocked in the face by another fist he didn't have time to dodge. Shinso took a step back, steadying himself. Shoyuta was holding back, but it still hurt to be punched in the face. Shinso lightly touched his cheek as he stared down Shoyuta. But the hero gave him no time to recover as he ran toward him. The two continued to spar for about an hour until Shinso finally managed to punch him in the face, which made him cheer just a bit before Shoyuta instantly tackled him and pinned him to the mat. Shinso tapped the mat, and Shoyuta got off of him right away. The kid rolled onto his back while the other walked into the kitchen and got 2 cups of water. Returning, Shinso sat up as he was handed a glass. "I gotta get going. Can you manage clean up?" The kid nodded before he chugged the water. "Even if I didn't know what to expect in the exam, I'm confident you're ready." Shinso handed the now empty cup back to the hero. He looked up at him, a realization just now dawning on him. "Wait, you don't even know what's going on in the exam?" Shinso shouted. "Nope," Shoyuta said, popping the pea as he walked away, a smile on his face. The last bell rang, and students poured out of the class. Hitoshi pulled out his phone as he packed up his school bag. He sent Shoyuta a text and got a response a split second later. "Hitoshi, going to Cat Cafe." "Shoyuta, which one?" "Hitoshi, one we went to last week." "Shoyuta, didn't we go to 2 last week?" "Hitoshi, Kitty Coffee, one with the cat that bit your ankles." "Shoyuta, I like that one. I'll get you next time, Mr. Middens." "Hitoshi, I'll let him know." "Shoyuta, have fun. Don't stay out too late." "Hitoshi, I won't." Hitoshi stifled a laugh as he walked out with the last of his classmates. Rounding the corner waiting for him was who Hitoshi liked to call Dumb and Dumber. Every school had them. They always come in a package deal, but sometimes he was lucky and got a group of 3 or 4. In some schools, they befriended Hitoshi and were friends up until they learned of his quirk. In others, he hid his quirk and was targeted because of it, and it would only get worse after they found out about it. Whether it was by unconventional means or from him just telling them the minute they found out his quirk, Hitoshi was pushed away. They always feared him. Hitoshi had gotten used to it and stopped reaching out, stopped feeling the need for friends or just any interaction from anyone. That was until Izuku came in and screwed everything up. Izuku was different. He was curious without being afraid and asked before he judged. Izuku thought his quirk was cool and not something to be scared of. Izuku made him think things were going to be different. He made him hopeful that maybe things had changed. Now he's gone and probably dead, and he's alone again. After transferring to a new school, when Shoyuta adopted him, things stayed the same. Except now he felt more alone than ever because the feeling of wanting friends was back, but the space was likely never to be filled again. Hitoshi tried to ignore Dumb, and Dumber kept his eyes ahead, walking by them. But of course they couldn't have that, and desperately wanted the attention Hitoshi wasn't providing them. Dumb tried to push Dumber into him, but Hitoshi just stepped to the side and out of the way. Training with Shoyuta was apparently paying off in other aspects of his life, dodging bullies. "Dude, what the hell? I almost touched the freak," Dumber said as he picked himself up off the floor. Dumb just snickered. Hitoshi continued walking, just trying to make it outside. Like the light at the end of a tunnel. Hitoshi could see the doors getting bigger and brighter, then blocked. They were both standing in front of him, blocking his way to the exit. He stepped to his side, and they stepped with him. He stepped to the other side, and they followed. "Move!" Hitoshi glared at them. Dumber flinched and took a step back, but Dumb didn't budge an inch. Hitoshi was a little surprised. Someone seemed to be growing some balls. "What's the rush? It's not like anyone is waiting for you," Dumb said, crossing his arms and standing firm. "Yeah, who would hang out with this freak?" Dumber asked, still standing behind the other. Hitoshi raised his eyebrows in surprise, like a revelation had just come over him. "You know, you're right." He stepped closer to the wall and leaned against it. "I can wait. You guys seem to have something really important you wanted to say to me." The boys were flabbergasted at this reaction, but stayed quiet. Hitoshi pushed off from the wall and had his hands in his pockets as he started walking closer to them. "Oh, I'm sorry, did you not hear me?" Hitoshi paused, standing in front of them and looking down. "What was it that you wanted from me?" Dumb furrowed his brow and gritted his teeth as he looked up at the tired eyes of Hitoshi. Dumber, however, let out his anger, which made Hitoshi crack a grin. "Why would we?" His mouth snapped shut and his eyes glazed over. "Get him out of my way," Hitoshi instructed Dumber, to which he shoved Dumb into the wall. Hitoshi stepped around and walked out of the school. Only then did he release his quirk. The thing about Dumb and Dumber was that they were given the names for a reason. At most schools, they were usually too afraid to touch him, so they stuck to being annoying and an inconvenience to Hitoshi. But on top of that, they were dumber than rocks. Walking down the sidewalk, he was about a block away when he came to his second impasse of the day. A swarm of people just standing in the middle of the sidewalk, blocking his way. Phones and cameras were out, and everyone was shouting, trying to be heard over the others. A little curious to what he was assuming was a hero that everyone was surrounding, Hitoshi inched closer until he could peek into the middle of the crowd. Except when he did finally get a glimpse, there was no hero but a kid. No older than him stood a boy with bicolored hair, getting shoved around and barged with question after question. "You're the son of Endeavor? Are you accompanied by your fathers? Is Endeavor around? What's it like being the son of the number 2 hero?" The sound of pictures being snapped and videos being recorded. In the middle of it all was the boy, unable to escape the crowd. He looked overall uncomfortable, not answering anyone or looking anywhere in particular. Hitoshi began backing away when they made eye contact with each other. He hesitated, but Hitoshi recognized the anger in his eyes. Immediately, he made a decision, finally getting through after pushing and forcing his way through the swarm. Hitoshi threw an arm over the boy's shoulder. "No wonder you were taking so long. We've been waiting for you a while now." He looked at Hitoshi confused and was about ready to shove his arm off. "Just go along with it," Hitoshi whispered to him. The boy nodded, and a quiet "sorry" fell from his lips. The boy was between trying to get Hitoshi's arm off him and trying to ignore that it's there. Hitoshi took his arm from his shoulder and placed it very lightly on his lower back. He steeled his gaze and looked at one of the first people standing in front of him, a lady. "What is your name?" Hitoshi asked. Her eyes glazed over. Hitoshi turned to the boy. "Get ready," he whispered. "For what?" the boy asked. Hitoshi turned back to the lady. "Sprint away," he instructed. The lady immediately dashed into a part of the crowd, sending many to topple over and fall to the ground, which cleared a path for both boys. "Run!" Hitoshi yelled as he grabbed the other boy's wrist and started running. They raced down the sidewalk, turning corner after corner to make sure they really lost those following. However, sporadic as it seemed, when they finally did come to a stop, they were standing right in front of the cat cafe. Hitoshi pulled the doors open, and they sat in the lobby as they caught their breath. The boy looked down at Hitoshi's hand, still holding his, and Hitoshi followed his gaze. Looking down at his hand, he quickly let go with an apology right after. The boy stared down, hesitating to speak. "Thanks." He paused for a bit, trying to find the words. "Thanks for helping me," he said quietly, still staring at the ground. "No problem," Hitoshi said with a tiny smile. The sound of a small bell rang within the cafe, like that from one of the cats, which made Hitoshi immediately speak up, worried. "I brought us to a cat cafe. You're not allergic or anything, are you?" The boy just shook his head. A lady wearing an apron approached them, asking them if they were looking to sit at a table. Hitoshi got up and looked back at the boy still sitting, but he just looked up at him confused. "You want to stay and sit with me or leave? It's up to you." Hitoshi understood if he wanted to go, considering he saw his quirk. He was always a villain and never enough. The boy got up and followed behind Hitoshi, who followed the lady to a table. Hitoshi made sure the boy didn't see the smile that grew when he followed behind him. They sat down across from each other, and she put down a menu in front of each of them. A couple cats walked over and circled their legs. "I never caught your name," Hitoshi spoke as he stroked a cat sitting on his lap. "I know you're the son of the big shot Endeavor, but honestly I never really liked the guy, so I never took the time to learn or remember anything about him." The corner of the boy's mouth perked up ever so slightly, that it would have gone unnoticed if Hitoshi was being trained by anyone other than Shoyuta. "Shoto Todoroki." "All right, Todoroki." "Shoto," he said, cutting off Hitoshi. "All right, Shoto, I'm Hitoshi Shinso, but you can call me whatever." Shoto nodded, and the faintest smile appeared on his lips. He then got up, sat on the ground, and pet all the cats that walked up to him. His eyes went wide with excitement every time a new one approached him. They split off at the entrance of the cafe, exchanging numbers before they went their ways. Shoto ran over his clothes several times over with a lint roller, trying to remove as much cat hair as possible before they left. Hitoshi even helped him out due to the sheer amount of feline hair that covered him. Hitoshi walked home, and upon entering the apartment saw Shoyuta sitting on the couch, with legs stretched out and his computer on his lap. Hope was curled up next to him, peeking up over his legs, looking like she just woke up. Shoyuta looked up at him. "Have a good time?" A smile began to form on Hitoshi's face as he walked over to the couch. "I think I might have made a friend." Izuku was jumping across the rooftops when something peculiar caught his eye. He then proceeded to miss his footing and almost fall. Once he pulled himself up and over, he looked off the edge at the boy walking down the sidewalk. He had 2 different colors in his hair, and, judging by the direction he was heading, was probably walking home. Izuku was kind of glad that he decided to start the night earlier than usual. "Hey!" Izuku called down to him. The 2-tone hair boy didn't react in the slightest. Izuku climbed down and ran in front of him, forcing the other to notice the vigilante and stop. "You're a Todoroki, right?" Izuku asked sort of loudly, but not quite at a yell yet. The one in question, a confused and little frightened Todoroki, nodded his head. "Shoto, right?" Shoto Todoroki nodded. Izuku smiled, although Todoroki didn't see it with the mask on. "I knew it. Your brother has told me quite a bit about you. I've thought about trying to meet you." Izuku continued rambling on about wanting to meet him and see his quirk and how it works, used, and every other little detail about it. This made the other even more confused, because how does Natsuo know this kid and why? But on top of it all, who even is this person? So he asked, cutting Izuku off in the middle of his sentence. Izuku balled both hands into fists, pressing one to his back and the other to his stomach as he went into a bow, but stopped himself before leaning too far down, quickly popping up and instead holding out a hand. "People call me the Emerald Nightwalker," Izuku said, taking his hand back before the other could even shake it. "It's a stupid name, I know, but I didn't choose it." Todoroki was just as confused as before, but now at least had a name to look up later. "Back to what I was saying. Half of your body is like your mother's, and the other half is like that sperm donor of yours, quirks and all." Todoroki was so taken aback by the title given to his hero father that he let out a little chuckle. Izuku stared at him, now also confused. This kid has barely said 2 words and now he's laughing. What? What's so funny? A little smile still on his face. Todoroki looked at the vigilante and said, I have never heard anyone say that about my father before. Just cause he's a hero doesn't mean I have to like him. You're the second person to tell me that today, which was weird that it happened twice in a day when usually everyone is singing praise for him. I should meet him. We'll form the I Hate Endeavor Club. Looking to join? You could be the president? This made Todoroki laugh even more. I'll gladly take on the position. The two laughed until Izuku got back on the subject of quirks again. Todoroki, without any persistence, stomped his foot to the ground and sent ice upward as tall as the building. He then immediately placed his left hand on it and melted the ice down to a puddle. When asked to use the fire quirk, though, he refused with a firm shake of his head. This kind of irritated Izuku, but he didn't show it. He just wanted to see the quirk, but there was no need to push. His questions were answered anyway. The demonstration was a bonus. I don't use my father's quirk, Todoroki stated, furrowing his brows. Izuku put his hands up in surrender. No biggie, dude, just curious about it. Todoroki unfurrowed his eyebrows, not realizing he really did it in the first place. Izuku started walking away. Where are you going? Todoroki asked. I just wanted to ask a few questions and see the quirk. We got nothing left to talk about. So bye. Izuku waved and turned away. Todoroki waved back much more awkwardly, but Izuku's back was already turned. Todoroki began walking when the vigilante called after him. Standing on one of the roofs, Izuku yelled down. Your father may have given you the quirk, but you're in control of it, not him. So that makes it your quirk, not his. Izuku then jumped to the next rooftop over, and then the next until he was gone. Todoroki walked home, not even knowing what to think. In control, not his, he whispered to himself as he entered the house. Checking to see if his father was home yet, which he wasn't, he walked into a room he hadn't visited in a while. Sitting against the wall was a shrine set up with a picture of a boy with familiar white hair and blue eyes. He closed the door behind him and sat in front of the shrine. He grabbed one of the incense sticks and looked down at one of his fingers on his left side. Holding his pointer finger out, he stared at it for a minute before he lit a small flame at the tip of his finger. He didn't like it, but the vigilante's words came back to him, and he whispered, my quirk, holding the lit finger to the top of the stick until it smoked. He then placed it in the cup and let it burn. Hitoshi suited up in something comfortable to move around in, which ended up being a pair of black sweats and a black t-shirt with an AC/DC logo on it. Walking out of the locker room, he stood with the others in front of ectoplasm waiting for instructions. Standing out there so far was only a girl and 2 boys, not including Hitoshi. The girl had black hair tied up in a high ponytail and was wearing a pair of shorts and a tank top that only covered her CHSD. One of the boys had engines in his leg and was standing stiffly while the other was tall and loud as he tried to make conversation with the girl. Shoto came out soon after and stood next to Hitoshi. Hey, dude. Hey. Shoto responded back, quieter than Hitoshi. How do you think you did on the test? I know I didn't do so well on the math portion. It wasn't too difficult. I didn't fail, Shoto said bluntly. I figured. Hitoshi had learned 3 things about his new friend over the past few weeks. Through the many conversations through text, and the one time they hung out at the cat cafe again. 1. Shoto was practically raised by his sister, who taught him almost everything, including his education. 2. He isn't some genius or prodigy when it comes to school, but it does just click easier with him. 3. He could be very unintentionally blunt. Hitoshi had learned that he enjoyed hanging out and talking with him, and it was the same for Shoto. Apparently, both had been starved from a good friend for a while, or in Shoto's case, any at all. Do you know anything about what they're going to make us do? Hitoshi asked. Shoto shook his head and tilted his head, asking the same thing. All I know is we're probably fighting each other, and there's an interview at the end. Interviewing us about what? Hitoshi shrugged. I don't know. Probably why we want to be a student at UA or something like that. Shoto nodded. The two continued to talk about anything and everything. Hitoshi was the one talking more, but Shoto was engaged and responding in short bursts. They were talking about a band they found they both liked when Hitoshi noticed the tall guy look over to them for what seemed like the 100th time. He looked like he was contemplating coming over to them or not. Right when it seemed like he made up his mind to walk over, ectoplasm spoke up for the first time since they had all been standing out there. "Welcome all to this year's recommendation exam," the hero said, projecting his voice. There were about 20 students now standing around listening to him speak. "You've all taken your written exam, and now it's time for your physical exam. You will be tested through a series of physical activities. You are allowed to use your quirks as you see fit. Don't overdo yourself and push way past your limits. But that being said, we want to see the best you can do. Without further ado, go beyond plus ultra." Physical indeed it was. Hitoshi and the rest of the students were put through races, obstacle runs, and strenuous activity after another. Shoto, of course, excelled in all of it, coming in first or second every time. If he wasn't first, it was because the tall dude that kept looking at them was. Thanks to the training with Shoyuta, Hitoshi wasn't necessarily struggling and wasn't ranking low, he just wasn't ranking all that high either. All the students that could use their quirks to get ahead did, but Hitoshi couldn't really do much in that department. After one of the tests, the boy with engines sticking out of his legs approached him. He was swinging one of his arms in a chopping motion as he spoke to Hitoshi. "Hello, fellow student. I am Tenya Ida. It is unwise not to use your quirk in these tests. You look as if you were holding back and not giving it your all. You could score rather low." Hitoshi was a little pissed by the comment, especially since he was covered in sweat from busting his ass through each test. Just because he couldn't use his quirk in these situations doesn't mean he wasn't trying any less. Hitoshi lifted the bottom of his shirt and used it to wipe the sweat off of his face. He then looked up at Ida and asked, "Can I give you some advice as well?" Ida nodded. "I am always looking to improve. What is it you would like to tell me? It would be wise to get the stick out of your ass if you're looking to be a hero of the public." Hitoshi reached out his hand for a handshake to a baffled Ida. "What was your name again?" Ida firmly took his hand as he answered, but his eyes glazed over before he could finish with it. Hitoshi instructed him to walk away and stand somewhere else until the next test began. "How's that for using my quirk?" The next test was one-on-one fighting. Cementos walked over to them and was setting up a small sparring area as ectoplasm explained the rules. Each student was randomly put into pairs, and the pairs would be called up one by one to fight each other. They went until one of them could no longer, one of them stepped out of bounds, one of them gave up, or until the 10-minute timer was up. Shoto got paired with a kid that had skin as dark as the night with a head of white hair. When called up to fight, Shoto immediately sent off his eyes toward him once the timer started. The fight ended in less than a minute with the kid half stuck in ice and half stuck in his own shadow. The next fight was with the tall kid. Hitoshi overheard his name was Inasa or something. He also apparently wasn't staring at Hitoshi but Shoto from the beginning. Hitoshi had periodically been watching him watch Shoto. He went against a blonde kid that wouldn't shut up. The match started and was also over in less than a minute. The blonde kid tried to rush at his opponent but was quite literally blown away by his ability and forced out of bounds. Fight after fight happened until it was eventually Hitoshi's turn, and of course he was paired with engine legs. Upon stepping onto the platform, Ida began yelling at him about his unconstitutional use of his quirk, but Hitoshi wasn't listening one bit. Instead, he looked into the crowd of students about to watch their fight and waved to Shoto, who gave an awkward wave back. Half of his body was frozen from using only his ice quirk the entire exam. The timer started and Ida rushed at Hitoshi, who jumped and rolled out of the way. Ida came to a halt, pivoted, and sent a kick aimed at his head right as Hitoshi got up. Hitoshi quickly ducked under the flying leg, then kicked out Ida's other leg. He fell to the floor but got away quick enough and bounced up before Hitoshi could do anything. Ida sent a fist toward his opponent, but Hitoshi dodged it and sent his own toward his face. They continued going back and forth until Hitoshi spoke up. "Hey man, do you know how much time is left?" he asked, dodging another kick. "I will not become distracted." Ida's body went limp and his eyes glazed over. Hitoshi dusted himself off as he caught his breath before instructing Ida to run out of bounds. Ida took off in a full sprint with his quirk activated and ran straight over the boundary line. Hitoshi then released him from his quirk. The rest of the students sparred until each pair had a winner. After each pair went Ectoplasm brought all the students together to announce the end of the physical portion of the exam. All students were sent back to the locker rooms to change and were brought to a hallway. Chairs lined the walls of the hallway, which was outside of Nizu's office. The rodent came out to initially greet everyone, then started calling the students in one by one. The principal escorted one student out, then called the next, Shoto, Todoroki. Hitoshi told him good luck as he got up from beside him and walked into the office. Nizu adjusted the camera to better frame Shoto. "Tea?" Nizu asked, standing next to the teapot. Shoto shook his head. "Okay then, we'll get started right away." Nizu sat down in his chair across from the boy and clasped his hands together. "Tell me, why do you want to be a hero?" Shoto was quiet as he looked at the desk and thought. Nizu was about to speak up, to ask another question, but Shoto started talking. He talked to the desk rather than the camera or Nizu, and his voice was low and quiet as he answered. "I never understood the appeal of being a hero. They never really fascinated me like they did for other people. I think it was because I was made to be one by my father. When I wasn't training with my father, I was usually with my sister. All my sister does is inspire people, and I want to be just like her the only way I know how, by using my quirk and becoming a hero. She is kind and gentle, and taught me everything I know. She made me want to help others." Shoto paused and looked up at Nizu. "I don't want to be just a hero. I want to help people that need it. I think I want to inspire others like how my sister did for me." Nizu got up and turned off the camera. He had a big smile on his face and spoke in a soft yet cheerful tone. "That is very good to hear. I wish you luck, young man." Jumping down off his desk, he escorted Shoto to the door and called in the next student. Izuku, standing outside the door to a bar, tightened his tie, fixed his mask and the cap on his head, then took a deep breath before walking in. He walked over to the counter and took a seat on one of the stools. A man made of a purple mist wearing a suit vest and a tie stood behind the counter cleaning a glass. "Kirojiri," Izuku assumed. "What can I get you?" The man of mist asked. "The name of the place where you got that vest, because that looks real nice," the deep voice of Izuku's mask said in a cheery tone. Kirojiri dropped the glass he was cleaning, but a portal of purple fog appeared on the ground, and the glass fell into it. Another portal appeared above Kirojiri, and the glass fell down into his hands. If Kirojiri could turn a different color, he'd be red. He put the glass down before he spoke. "I'm sorry, I don't actually know. It was given to me as a gift from my master. Is there anything else I could get you?" Izuku rested his chin on his hands as he pondered. "Do you have any tea?" "Of course. Anything in particular?" Kirojiri had already started searching, ready to find the specific tea to satisfy his guest. Izuku shrugged. "Doesn't matter as long as it's hot." Kirojiri was relieved that it wasn't something they didn't have, but it only lasted a second. He looked at the selection and couldn't decide, worried he won't like it. Afraid he was taking too long to choose, Kirojiri reached out and blindly picked one. He began preparing the drink when a scrawny, disheveled, chapped, grayish-blue-haired man-child walked in from down the hall. He presumed it was Tamura Shigaraki, the supposed head. "Who's this NPC?" he asked, sitting down on one of the stools, leaving an empty one between him and Izuku. Kirojiri seemed to glance over his shoulder, just as curious. Izuku hopped off his chair, balled his hands in a fist. He placed one over his stomach and the other behind his back, then bowed. "Smiling Reaper," Izuku said, lifting his head. Shigaraki looked confused as he scratched his neck. Kirojiri placed the cup down, steam floating from the top of it, which prompted Izuku to sit back down in his spot. He lifted just the bottom of his mask and brought the cup to his mouth, sipping it. He gave the anticipating Kirojiri a nod of approval. He had to admit it was good, but still not better than Dabi's, though. "The killer for hire?" Kirojiri asked. The man-child stopped scratching his neck for a second at the mention of this, seeming to finally catch on to who Izuku was. Izuku nodded, placing the cup down and sliding his mask back down. "I guess that's what I am, but why are you here?" Shigaraki asked, hands back to scratching his neck. Izuku turned toward him. "I know you're planning an attack on UA. I want in." Shoyuta was sitting on the couch doing work and waiting for Hitoshi to get home from his exam when his phone buzzed. He unlocked the phone to see a text from his boss. "Nizu, I'm still going through the interviews, deciding who to put in your class, and we'll send you those videos at a later date. Nizu, I thought you might want to see Shinso's interview. He is the only one decided so far, winky face. With the text message was a video attachment. Pressing play on it, the video immediately started with the shaking of the camera pointed at Hitoshi as Nizu adjusted it. Tea? Nizu asked. Sure, Hitoshi replied. You could hear the tea being poured in the video, but couldn't see it. Nizu blocked the camera as he walked across the desk and placed the cup down in front of Hitoshi. You are the first student to accept my offer of tea since I've been doing these interviews. Shoyuta assumed the rodent had taken a seat in his chair since he was no longer in the frame. I heard it's smart to accept the offer from you, Hitoshi said. Shoyuta smiled, glad he took his advice to accept the drink. Nizu laughed. Whoever told you that knows what he's talking about. They each took a sip, then Nizu began with the first question. How is it living with Shoyuta? Hitoshi placed the cup down on the little plate and looked at the rodent. It's really nice. It's the best home I've lived in so far since receiving my quirk. Hitoshi smiled. That could be said about any home that doesn't have someone muzzling me upon entry, he said with a bit of a chuckle. But living with Shoyuta is pretty awesome. Hitoshi paused, then a smile grew on his face. He treats me like a human being, and I feel like I'm finally allowed to be a kid. He truly is a great dad, and I hope he doesn't doubt that. Shoyuta paused the video. He looked up at the ceiling as he felt his eyes tear up. He wasn't failing, he was actually doing good. He was being a good dad. Shoyuta unpaused the video and Hitoshi's face flushed red. You're not going to show this to him, are you? Hitoshi asked. No, of course not, Nizu said with no hesitation. It's good to hear that. Next question. Why do you want to be a hero? Hitoshi sat in silence for a bit, looking to ponder his answer. He then looked up and answered. I want to help those like me. Hitoshi was silent for a bit, trying to think of more of his answer. I've always wanted to be a hero. When I was young, like most kids, it was for fame and fortune, but then my quirk developed. No one looked at me or talked to me. They saw my quirk and feared me. It made me want to help those like me, to help the people that no one listened to and refused to see. A hero that grabs the hands of those reaching out, but no one's paying any attention to them. A hero that shows people there are no good or evil quirks, just quirks. A hero that puts confidence into others despite the quirk they were born with. Hitoshi sniffled a bit. A hero like him. Hitoshi's voice broke, and he looked down at the desk. A hero like who? Nizu's voice was soft as he asked. He quickly wiped his eyes before looking up. An old friend. Has he passed? Hitoshi shrugged. He's too strong to just lay down and die. I'll believe it when I see the body. The interview concluded, and the video eventually came to an end. Shoyuta put his phone to the side and was about to get back to work when he heard the door unlock and Hitoshi walked in. He immediately got up. Hey, Hitoshi said, putting down the keys on the counter. Shoyuta just stared at him, which seemed to confuse him. What? You got in, Shoyuta said in a monotone voice. What? You got in? He said again, this time with a slow, growing smile. Hitoshi ran towards Shoyuta, wrapping his arms around him. Shoyuta was surprised at first, but then slowly wrapped his arms around his kid. They were like that for a bit when Hitoshi spoke up. You saw the interview, Hitoshi said, head still against Shuta's CHSD. Yep, Shoyuta replied, popping the pea and squeezing him tighter. Izuku had signed himself up out of both fun and boredom months ago, thinking he would never go. Except nothing has come up and he isn't busy, so guess he's taking the UA entrance exam today. He rolled onto the ground from his pile of clothes, he called a bed, and immediately shot up from how cold the floor was. He sauntered over to the direction of the door. Putting his arms out the closer, he felt he got until feeling the familiar metal. Pushing it open, the sun poured and instantly brightening up his living space. Wind blew, and along with the light, pushing around his suits, hung up on a string in the back. Still groggy, and now with his hair in his face, Izuku stood with his hands on his hips staring at the pile of clothes. Falling into his pile, he began to rummage through it. Pushing and pulling around an assortment of clothes and old sheets and blankets, Izuku searched for the outfit. Spotting bright colors in the midst of dark, he reached for it and pulled it out. Instead of what he was looking for, he was now holding an all-might jacket. One of the only things to survive the fire was the jacket of a man he hated. Izuku tossed it aside and continued to search, pulling out black shirt after shirt, pants after pants, until eventually he found the set. Holding the school uniform up to the sun pooling in from the door, Izuku smiled at the victory of finally finding it. Funny smiling at something that only brought him pain. He waved it around and smacked it down, trying to get as much dirt off of it as possible. He hung the top up in the hopes it would help with the wrinkles as he jumped into the pants, bouncing up and down as he pulled them up. Pulling out a small set of tools, he rolled them up in a pair of black sweatpants and packed them away into a blue drawstring bag. He had found the bag amidst the other trash while cleaning the beach. After cleaning the sand out, it was nice besides the little holes that decorated it. He walked over to his yellow backpack, digging through it trying to find a notebook that either didn't have his name on it or any hero killing plans in them. They were in code, so even if someone got their hands on them, they wouldn't be able to understand it, but it didn't hurt to play it safe. He settled on an old math notebook that barely had pages filled. Izuku then reached his hand back in the bag, trying to find a writing utensil. After some serious digging, he eventually pulled out a pen. You'd think with how neat and organized the inside of his notebooks and suits were that other aspects of his life would also be that way. Izuku threw the notebook and pen into the blue bag. He then packed his beanie to cover his hair and checkered mask to cover his face, since he wouldn't be able to put them on without looking suspicious until the physical part of the exam. If Aizawa is there, he expects him to recognize him because of the mask and the beanie. Other than that, no one should recognize him without them but one, Katsuki. He'd just have to keep his head low and let his hair cover his face while trying to stay away from the cameras. He was dead anyway, so it'd just be a ghost walking the halls. Now he needed something to wear during the physical part of the exam. He has his black sweats, but nothing for the upper body. He couldn't wear his vigilante hoodie, as if the mask wasn't already obvious enough. Izuku looked over to the sprawled-out All Might jacket laying on the floor. He held it up, then tried it on. As much as he hated the guy, his merch was pretty comfortable. It'll work, he thought as he shrugged it off and shoved it into the bag. He should probably get going. He was already running late. Izuku threw on the top of his middle school uniform over the white, oversized t-shirt he already had on. He grabbed the bag he packed and began buttoning his shirt up as he walked down the sidewalk on his way to UA. Izuku stared in astonishment at the large arch at the beginning of the school. Students raced past him, running just as late as he was. He watched the arch as he passed underneath until it was eventually behind him. He was now relishing in the school building, looking it all over and taking in every detail. Izuku was hypnotized by the school he once foolishly dreamed of attending, trying to see as much as he could of it as he walked through the main entrance and followed the signs to the auditorium. Walking down the hall, he peered into classrooms through the windows, each one looking like the last, yet he still looked at and into every one he passed. Eventually, he made it to the auditorium, very much late. What he assumed was a staff member was sitting at a desk outside the door. After getting Izuku's name, or at least the one he put on the form he filled out, he was handed a card and a couple pieces of paper. He walked into the dark room, lights centered on Present Mike standing on the stage in the front explaining the exam. Izuku popped a squat in the first seat he could find and listened to Present Mike. The kid next to him turned toward him and fixed his glasses as he whispered, "Fellow student, you were late. How do you expect to be a good hero if you can't even show up on time for the exam? If you can't even take the exam, seriously leave room for someone who actually will." Izuku just flipped him off. The kid looked offended and focused back on Present Mike. Izuku flipped through the papers and looked at his card. The card had his name with no picture, what classroom his writing exam was in, and what battle center he was at for the physical exam. The papers were just information on what to expect on each exam. Considering the writing exam was first, Present Mike must have already gone over it since he was now explaining the robot point values on the physical. Suddenly, a spotlight shined on the kid next to him, and Mike pointed to him. "Shit." Izuku shifted as much as he could from it and looked away as he listened to the kid ask his question. The kid held up one of the papers and pointed to the one robot that Mike didn't mention. On the printout, there are 4 robots listed, not 3. You should be ashamed. This is a prestigious school, and yet your handouts don't even line up with what you're presenting. Present Mike pointed a finger gun at him. "Thanks, examinee, for calling in your question. The hero threw up his arms as the last robot appeared on the screen behind him. He explained it, to which the student said his thanks and bowed. He pushed his glasses up his face as he sat back down, and the light died off of him. Izuku shifted comfortably back in his chair, so he was facing the hero again. As Mike continued, Izuku turned toward the kid next to him. Having a stick that far up your ass probably isn't good for you, Izuku whispered to him with a concerned look. He grinned when the kid scowled back at him and didn't look at Izuku for the rest of Mick's presentation. The hero tried to get a collective plus ulta out of everyone, yelling the phrase to the crowd, but only silence yelled back. The lights were turned back on, and students exited the auditorium toward their assigned classrooms. Izuku peered into all the classrooms he passed, getting the attention from both kids in classrooms and those walking with him to theirs. Eventually, he found his room and took a seat in one of the open desks in the back. He wanted one by the window, but they were all taken. He opened his bag and was digging for the 1 pen he brought when the glasses kid walked up to him. Izuku groaned as he stopped what he was doing to look at this guy, his hair covering his eyes. "Tenya Ida," he said as he held out his hand. Great, not only was he dealing with a kid of a hero, but one of those stuck-up ones. Izuku never took his hand, just looked at it almost like it was disgusting. "How can I help you?" Ida furrowed his eyebrows as he lowered his hand. "I wanted to apologize for what I said earlier." "It's fine, dude, it's already forgotten." Izuku didn't really care, so he kind of did already forget what he said in the auditorium. He went back to digging for his pen, but Ida didn't leave. "You're the second person to tell me that." He paused, but Izuku didn't cease his search. "To remove the stick from my rear." Izuku looked up at him, irritated. "Maybe you should start taking the advice then? Or are you waiting on a third?" Ida scowled and quickly walked back to his seat at the front of the classroom. A woman, probably a teacher of the school, but it wasn't a hero, walked into the class. She dropped a stack of papers on the desk sitting at the front of the class. After distributing them to all the students, she went over the rules and regulations. No leaving once the test begins, must complete in the allotted time, must answer every question, etc. The woman then closed the door to the class and looked at her watch before telling everyone they may begin. Izuku flipped through the packet, seeing all the questions before going back to the beginning and circling his first answer. There was a section of multiple choice in the beginning, but it was a small part of the test which consisted of mainly open response questions. Most of the test was centered toward actual school like math and English, but the last page was analyzing a hero of your choice. Of course, Izuku picked the only correct hero, Eraserhead. When he felt like he was done, he flipped back to the front and looked at the empty space next to name before writing your mom. He was the first to get up and turn his test, in which the woman took and addressed him to make his way to the locker rooms by his battle center. Izuku left and started making his way over there, but at some point after wandering aimlessly, he didn't get lost per se, just sidetracked. He had way too much time before the physical started, but his exploring eventually turned to walking around until he knew where he was again. He was walking down a hallway. He could have sworn he already walked down when he flinched at the familiar pair of footsteps that started to approach from behind him, stopping him in his tracks. "Hey, kid, you lost." Eraserhead called out to him as he walked down the hallway to him. Of course it was him. It just had to be him. Izuku quickly made sure his hair was covering as much of the upper half of his face before turning around to face him. He shouldn't recognize him, but just in case. "Come on, I'll show you where you're supposed to be," Aizawa said, almost annoyed as he waved him over. Izuku hesitated. He didn't move, just stared at him. His shoulders were hunched in with one of his hands balled into the other and held to his chest. Something seemed to flicker over the hero. He stopped a little ways before Izuku and held out a hand as he softened his voice. "You're not in any trouble. I'm just here to help you." Izuku didn't know how to feel about this. He was just acting, trying to play the nervous lost. He was actually lost. That wasn't an act, kid, but he sort of felt relieved. He dropped his hands and walked over. Aizawa took a step back, almost seeming to flinch, but quickly recovered. Did he recognize him? "You finished your written test already?" the hero asked as they began walking. Izuku nodded. "Okay, so you got a little lost heading to the locker rooms. It's a big school, it's bound to happen. Sorry if I'm interrupting you in the middle of cleaning." Aizawa stopped in his tracks. Izuku stared at the ground, hiding his grin. "Thanks for helping me. I'm not a janitor." Aizawa said in his deep monotone voice. You're not? Izuku tried really hard to act shocked while also holding a laugh. They both started walking again. Then what do you do here? Izuku asked. I'm one of the teachers. Aizawa responded. Oh, okay. I am? I said okay. Yeah, but I don't feel like you believe me. You said you're a teacher, so you're a teacher. It doesn't matter. What battle center are you at? Aizawa asked. Both walked in silence until Aizawa spoke up, breaking it. I'm also one of the heroes here. Yeah, sure, and I'm All Might. Izuku saw Aizawa grab the bridge of his nose from the corner of his eye before taking a deep breath. You know what? It doesn't matter. Izuku was trying really hard not to laugh. It really didn't take much to test the patience of this guy. They got to the end of a hallway that split off into multiple hallways, each with a different letter at the top of them. Aizawa stopped and pointed to a hall. Just walk the rest of the way down there until you reach the sign that directs you to the locker room. Izuku nodded and began walking. Thanks, Eraserhead. Izuku called back, letting out a little chuckle to himself before running the rest of the way. Shoyuta woke up to the buzzing of his phone. He sat up on the couch as he read the message from his boss. Nizu, we got a loose one. Smiley face. Shoyuta, what does that even mean? Nizu, there's a lost kid. You're closest. Go get it, smiley face. Shoyuta, where even is this kid? Nizu, around the corner. Shoyuta laid his head back and looked at the ceiling as he let out the biggest sigh. He peeled himself from the couch and dragged himself to the door. He walked out and peered around the corner, but no one was there. He glared at the camera, knowing the rodent could see him. His phone buzzed. Nizu, I never said that, corner, winky face. You mother few. Nizu language. There could be kids around. Shoyuta glared at the camera again, letting out another sigh before walking on, turning corner after corner, walking down hall after hall until eventually he saw a small body in the distance. He began approaching when he saw the kid flinch and stop. Did he hear him approaching? That wasn't possible. Even seasoned heroes struggled to hear his footsteps. Who was this kid? Quirk? Hey, kid. You lost? Shoyuta called out. He watched as he messed with his hair before turning around. Green curls covered eyes and nose. The only thing visible was his pursed lips sitting in a frown. Something about him seemed familiar. Shoyuta wasn't in the mood to be dealing with this right now. Come on, I'll show you where you're supposed to be, he said as he waved the kid over. Something tugged inside of Shoyuta as he watched him hunch in on himself. Shit, he was scaring him. He slowly walked toward him and held out his hand. You're not in any trouble. I'm just here to help you. It seemed to work because the kid dropped his hands and made his way over. Shoyuta took a step back. He didn't hear footsteps. The kid was making no sound when he walked. He tried to calm his thoughts as he got closer. You finished your written test already? They began to walk, and Shoyuta saw the kid nod from the corner of his eye. Okay, so you got a little lost heading to the locker rooms. It's a big school. It's bound to happen. Where are his footsteps? Sorry if I'm interrupting you in the middle of cleaning. Shoyuta stopped in his tracks. What is so wrong with dressing comfortably? Does he smell? Is that it? He's not going for the look of your typical hero, especially considering he's underground, but still, is it so wrong to be comfortable? Thanks for helping me. I'm not a janitor. Shoyuta said. Guess it's better than being called homeless again. You're not? Then what do you do here? The kid asked. I'm one of the teachers. Shoyuta responded. Oh, okay. Is it that hard to believe? I am. I said okay. Yeah, but I don't feel like you believe me. You said you're a teacher, so you're a teacher. Shoyuta didn't realize he was going to get into a fight with a kid today, but apparently anything can happen. They were getting off track. Where they need to go is what matters right now. It doesn't matter. What battle center are you at? Shoyuta asked. Both walked in silence, but the lack of footsteps coming from the kid was weirding him out. He had to break this silence. I'm also one of the heroes here. It didn't matter if the kid knew anyway. Very few people have heard of him, and he wasn't about to give his name out to someone he didn't even know was going to attend the school or not. Yeah, sure, and I'm all might. This little shit. Shoyuta had to calm down. He grabbed the bridge of his nose before taking a deep breath. You know what? It doesn't matter. They finally got to the entrances for the battle centers, and he pointed to the kids. Just walk the rest of the way down there until you reach the sign that directs you to the locker room. He nodded and they both split off, still no footsteps. Thanks, Eraserhead. Shoyuta heard from the kid. He turned around, but the kid just seemed to vanish. Shoyuta was now utterly stumped. Who the F was this kid? Izuku slipped into the locker room and searched the place to see if anyone else was also in there with him. After finding no one, he walked to the very back and shrugged the bag off his shoulders. Emptying the bag in the silence of no one else made him realize something. How difficult was that test, because no one else is here but him? He handled it with ease, but judging by the quiet room, it must have been giving everyone trouble for them to be taking this long. Or he was super late and everyone is already changed, just waiting for the next exam to start. Izuku quickly jumped into the sweatpants and pulled the All Might jacket over his white t-shirt. He threw the uniform shirt into his bag and rolled the tools up into his uniform pants. Letting his mask hang around his neck, Izuku pushed his hair back and out of his face and slid his beanie on. He was stuffing the rest of his hair into the hat when he heard the locker room open and students started to pour in. Izuku threw the hood of the jacket over his beanie, the All Might hair hanging down the back of his head. He picked up his bag and walked out to wait by the entrance of the battlefield, glaring at Ida with a shit-eating grin as he passed him and pulled the mask onto his face. He sat down against the concrete doors, laying his head back onto the hard surface. A few minutes passed, and more students began to join him as they stood waiting for the exam to begin. He closed his eyes while he was waiting, but that didn't stop the girl from walking up to him. It was obvious she was nervous from the way her quiet voice shook as she asked Izuku her question. "How do you look so calm about this?" Izuku popped an eye open, only then realizing how genuine the question really was. She had short brown hair that shaped her face and was shaking like she was getting paid for it. "I don't care whether I get in or not." Izuku shrugged, looking up at her. "I don't think I can do that," she said, still very much shaking all over. Izuku lifted his head from the door. "Because you actually want to get into this school?" She looked at him confused, especially as he patted the spot next to him. She hesitated but sat down after he patted the spot again. "Inko," he said, holding a hand to his CHSD. Right as she went to answer, Izuku yelled "boo" as loud as he could at her face, scaring the living daylights out of her and causing everyone else to turn toward them. "What the hell was that for?" she yelled at him. "You're not shaking anymore." She held out her arms, looking for the tremor in her hands and fingers, but they were still. She looked back at Izuku and smiled. "All you gotta do is act like you're having fun out there until you actually are." Her smile began to drop, but Izuku stopped her. "A smile is a good place to start," he softly said, holding his mask down halfway and baring his teeth. It looked less like he was smiling and more just showing off his teeth, the corner of her mouth perking back up again. "Good, now go away," Izuku said, shooing her away with his hands. She got up but wasn't mad like Izuku was expecting. She was still smiling, but it was genuine now. "I'm Uruaka, by the way." Izuku just ignored her as he laid his head back against the concrete doors, closing his eyes again. "Thank you," Uruaka said as she walked away with a little more pep in her step than when she approached him. The corner of Izuku's mouth definitely did not perk up. As more and more kids flooded the waiting zone behind the door, Present Mike called over the intercoms. "Get ready, little listeners. The exam will begin in 5 minutes." Izuku took a sigh of relief. He was tired of waiting. He stood up and stretched, then pulled out a screwdriver for his rolled-up set of tools in his bag. As time got closer, Mike talked more and more, going on about doing your best and other sappy stuff like that, then ending his whole spiel with a plus ultra. After he was finished talking, the doors began to open, and Izuku immediately slipped through the small opening. No one followed him until the doors were wide open and Present Mike yelled something. But by then Izuku was already far into the fake city. Running as fast as he could, he searched for a particular robot. Sliding under and swerving around, he weaved through the robots until he saw a three-pointer. Izuku rolled underneath it. The robot tried reaching under itself and moving around trying to get to Izuku, but he just held onto the bottom and moved with it. Emergency switch, emergency switch. Where the F is it? The robot grabbed his leg and was trying to pull him out from under it, but Izuku spotted a tiny little switch closer to one of the legs. He hit it, and the robot immediately dropped him. He climbed on top of it and stabbed the screwdriver into the robot, trying to create space until he could get his little fingers under the panel. Ripping it off exposed wires and other various override controls. Izuku smiled and started digging around and messing with them. The robot lurched forward, his arms randomly raised, then randomly spinning or coming to a halt as Izuku pulled around wires and pushed buttons. However, after eventually getting used to it, he didn't like how slow it was moving. Izuku crawled back underneath it and stuck his screwdriver into the crevice of another panel, reached in, then climbed in. A few seconds later, he crawled back out and back on top. Sticking his hands back into the set of wires, the robot started to move again, this time lunging forward as it quickly picked up speed. A maniacal laughter escaped his mouth as Izuku drove the robot around the city, passing students and every now and again destroying another robot. He would slam into the side of buildings as he tried, drifting around corners without slowing down. Izuku stuck to mainly just speeding around the fake city, zooming by other students who in turn just stared at him confused. He would randomly pull out the notebook in his bag and write down a few of the interesting quirks he saw. More of the small floating camera thingies started to gather around him, close enough that Izuku reached up and quickly grabbed one. It tried to fly away and escape Izuku's arms, but he just held on tighter. He inspected the robot, putting his eyes close to the camera as he looked at it. Izuku tore into the back of the robot until it eventually stopped trying to escape. He then turned it around, wiped the clear protector over the camera, then held it with his feet. With both hands, he signed into the camera as he talked to it, to the people watching. I don't know if you can hear me or not. That's why I'm signing it too. He enthusiastically waved at it. Hi, Eraser. I'm sure you already realized it was me. I was bored, so I signed myself up, and now here we are. Izuku paused as he drove the robot away from the destruction, getting closer to him. He then went back to signing and talking to the camera. That was kind of it, he shrugged. Oh, and I'm taking this. Thanks. Izuku waved to the camera as he turned it off like he was waving to viewers watching a video on the internet. He then proceeded to stuff it in his bag and continue driving. The ground began to shake and rumble. It felt like an earthquake surging through the city. Izuku had to hold on to the robot as he tried not to fall off. The earthquake didn't stop but smoothed out and lessened. Izuku regained his grip and zoomed through the city trying to figure out what it was. The robot drifted around a corner, and Izuku came face to face with a robot taller than all the buildings. It towered over everything and everyone, and Izuku watched as students cowered and ran past him. He wasn't scared, just smiled his unusual smile as he drove closer to it. Only as he got closer did he see Uruaka stuck under a rock screaming for help. Izuku wasn't worried. UA wouldn't kill a student, and the giant robot probably is being controlled or has a switch for one of the teachers to hit to stop it. There's probably a way to control that thing up there, Izuku thought as he stared at the head of the robot. Izuku remembered seeing Uruaka able to float things. Maybe she could get him up there quicker. Izuku drove over to Uruaka, who was stuck under rubble calling for help. Izuku slid off the robot and ran over to her. Inko, is that you? Please, help me, she cried and reached out to him between trying to push the rubble off of her. Uruaka, calm down. You're going to be fine. Sho, Izuku said with a finger up to his mask. There was no hint of fear or worry in his voice, and he almost seemed impatient trying to get to the point. Uruaka almost seemed to cry more at the lack of emotion Izuku was showing. Uruaka, I'm going to help you. You're going to be fine. I just need you to do something for me in return. Do you understand? She nodded through the tears. What do you need me to do? Would you be able to use your quirk on me? If your quirk has to do with weight, I am lighter than I look. Izuku hated to admit it, but it may be the only way to convince her. She nodded. Cool. She lifted out her hand. You just need to touch my hand, and my quirk will activate on you. Give me a second. Let me get the rock off you first. Izuku ran away and back to the robot he was riding. What? Then what do you need my quirk for? She yelled out, confused. The rock lifted off of her, and she dragged herself out before the robot Izuku was riding carefully placed it back down. The zero-pointer was quickly getting closer. Izuku jumped off of his robot and excitedly bounced over to Uruaka and held out his hand. I need to get up there. he said, pointing to the head of the big robot with his other hand. Why? We can just run away. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows. You owe me for getting you out from under the rock. That's what a hero is supposed to do. Uruwaka yelled at him. Just send me up there. Izuku angrily yelled at her. He held out his hand, and she slapped it, much harder than necessary. He felt himself get lighter, and he pushed off the ground toward the robot, then used the side of it to pull his way up. He cackled excitedly as he got closer to the top. Uruwaka released her quirk once, seeing him float over the head of the robot, then ran. Izuku landed on top, and using his screwdriver and other various tools, he made his way into the head of the robot, where there was a small opening and even smaller control panel. He crawled underneath the controls and ripped out a few cords and wires. Looking through the small holes on the head of the robot and using the controls, Izuku turned the robot around. He smiled and laughed with pure joy as he knocked down buildings. He then drove it as fast as it could go to the edge of the city. Finally, someone gets it, Shoyuta said as he placed his coffee cup down. He watched along with everyone else as the kid slipped through the barely open door and just start running. They laughed a bit at his choice of clothing, but all watched intrigued as he weaved through all the robots, confused as to what he was doing instead of destroying them. Eventually, he gets to a three-pointer, and they all watched as he shut it down and started riding it around. Who is this kid? Namuri finally asked the question everyone was wondering. It seems the cameras haven't figured that out yet. Nizu answered. Every time the camera flickered to a kid, a name would show up underneath him on the screen, but not for the one in the All Might hoodie. Eventually, though, after watching the kid slam into a building for the 5th time, the camera finally assigned the kid his name. Everyone turned toward Shoyuta. Confused, he looked up to see Inko Aizawa sitting in the corner of the screen of the kid. Don't look at me. I don't know him, Shoyuta said, taking a sip of his coffee. Nizu pulled out a piece of paper with the information to everyone's questions. No wonder the camera took so long to register who he was. He somehow managed to bypass the system and submitted his form without a picture and a lot of other information. What kind of quirk we looking at? Sekijiro asked. It seems the kid has some humor. Nizu let out a chuckle. Quirk Riz. Description. Your mom wakes up at my house. A teacher or two spit out their coffee. Some let out a laugh, while others commented on how inappropriate of the kid to put such a thing. They all turned their attention back to the screens and watched as the kid grabbed a camera and started talking and signing to them. They could hear his voice because the camera was close enough, but usually it wasn't very good at picking up sound. Shoyuta sat up at the close-up of the face and the familiar mask and beanie. Shit, he didn't know him. Hi, Eraser. The kid waved into the camera, causing everyone to turn and face him again. Shoyuta just ignored them and took another sip of his coffee. The screen suddenly goes black, and the teachers watch from another view as the kid stuffs the camera into his bag. Release it, Nizu said, as he took a sip of tea. A button emerged from the desk in front of the principal. He slammed his small fist on it. The zero-pointer rose from underneath the city and began making its way through the streets. As everyone ran away, not this one, they watched the three-pointer drive and drift through the streets toward the danger. The kid approached the screaming girl stuck in rubble and said something to her before jumping back on the robot. Shoyuta didn't know why, but it was kind of surprising to see him help another student. The teachers watched in confusion as the two quarreled about something before she slapped his hand and he floated up to the top of the zero-pointer. They watched him climb in, and just as quick the robot turned around and started moving in the other direction. Nizu, I think it's time to shut it down, Shoyuta said, standing and getting closer to the screens. I really wish I could Shoyuta, but it appears the kid has overridden the controls. I am locked out, the principal said in his usual cheery tone as he furiously typed. As the robot started heading toward the edge of the city, Shoyuta and a few of the other teachers rushed out of the room, running as fast as they could toward the fake city, fearing the kid was trying to drive it out into the world. However, they all approached the giant robot sitting on the other side of the breached wall, with no one in it or around. They did find a piece of torn notebook paper sitting inside of the head of the robot. These things are a lot more fun to drive than they look. Thanks for the camera, Winky Face. Katsuki, Mitsuki yelled upon entering the house. She got no response, Setting her stuff down on the dining room table, she placed the rest of the mail down and yelled for her son again, but no response. She grabbed the letter addressed to him and walked up the stairs and toward his room. Mitsuki pushed the cracked door open to find her son working at his desk. Katsuki jumped when he caught her in the corner of his eye. "I didn't hear you walk in," Katsuki said to the questioning look of his mother. Was he talking louder than normal? If he was, he couldn't tell. "What are you working on?" She seemed to be straining her voice like she's yelling, but it sounded no different to Katsuki. "Just homework." He turned toward the papers sitting on his desk, then back to his mother. "What?" Katsuki didn't want to admit it, but he was looking at her mouth more than anywhere else, almost trying to read her lips as she talked. "I've been yelling for you," she said. Katsuki brought one of his hands to his ears, lightly touching them. "I didn't hear that either." A worried expression crossed Mitsuki's face. This was happening more frequently, getting worse the more he trained. "What'd you need?" The worried expression was gone just as quick as it appeared and was replaced with a smile. "A letter came for you," she said, handing it to him. He snatched it from her hands. "Why didn't you lead with that?" he yelled. He turned around and tore it open over his desk, a small disc falling onto the surface as he opened the envelope. He turned around to tell his mother to leave, but she was already gone, his door closed. He didn't hear her walk out at all. He touched his ears again as he turned back around. Suddenly a projection shot up from the disc, and he was making eye contact with All Might in a yellow suit. "Hello, I am here as a projection." Katsuki could only faintly hear the hero and was mostly relying on the closed captions at the bottom of the projection. "Young Bakugo, I am here to share with you your results. I'd like to congratulate you on passing your written exam." All Might paused and held out a thumbs up. "You got a total of 45 villain points. However, that is not the only thing we grade on. Young Bakugo, you show a heart for heroism. The way you helped many of your fellow students did not go unnoticed. You were awarded 50 hero points, placing you at number 1. All Might turned to the side to show a screen with his name sitting at the top next to points he earned. "You have the makings of a true hero, young Bakugo. Welcome to UA." The projection ended and disappeared. Katsuki just sat in silence staring at the wall. "I did it," he said quietly. "I did it," he said again, this time yelling. Then in a softer voice he whispered, "I did it, Izuku. You're going to be a hero." His mother ran in, enveloping him in a hug. "I never doubted you for a second, brat." Katsuki smiled. He was going to be a hero like Izuku. "Shoto, open up. You got your letter?" Fuyumi knocked on her brother's door. He opened it and they both walked in, closing the door behind them. They sat on the bed, and she watched as he slowly cut the envelope open. Shoto pulled out a disc. It activated in his hands, and a projection shot out. He fixed it so he was holding it comfortably in his palms, and both of them watched as Nisa spoke. The principal took a sip of tea. "Hello, Shoto Todoroki. I am very pleased to welcome you into UA. Congratulations." The projection ended, and Fuyumi wrapped her arms around him. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." She cheered. The corners of his mouth began to perk up as a small smile formed. He was going to have to tell his father when he got home. Shoto knew he was going to be pleased, but he wouldn't react like this. He wouldn't be proud of him like this. Hitoshi kicked the front door shut with the back of his foot. He walked into the kitchen, holding a pile of mail in his arms when a wrapped box caught his eye. Dropping the mail on the counter, he walked over to the box sitting in the center of the table. Pulling it closer to him, a little tag hung off the side of it. "To you, Hitoshi." "Congrats." "Shoyuta." Hitoshi laid his head on the top of it. He was kind of expecting another cat. Carefully, he lifted the lid, but nothing jumped out. Instead, laying in the middle was a familiar bundle of cloth. Hitoshi pulled out the rope-like weapon and marveled at it. His very own capture weapon. He threw it over his head and fixed it to fit snugly around his neck. Hitoshi struck a pose, and the scarf instantly shot out, slapping the nearest wall and startling him. It'd probably be best to wait for Shoyuta to get home before he accidentally starts destroying the apartment. He pulled the strewn-out piece back in and slowly took it off. Holding the pile of cloth in his arms, he went back over to the mail and looked through it, pulling out the envelope addressed to him. Hitoshi walked into his room and dropped the scarf on the end of his bed and his backpack on the floor next to his desk. Rolling out his desk chair, he took a seat and ripped the top of the envelope open. Pouring the contents onto his desk, a projection instantly shot out of the disc after it finished rolling. Nizu appeared in front of him, holding a teacup. "Hello, Hitoshi Shinso. I really enjoyed our talk and hope to speak with you more in the future. I'm sure Shoyuta has already informed you, but I'd also like to formally congratulate you. I am very pleased to welcome you into UA." The principal smiled and took a sip of his tea before the projection ended and he disappeared. Hitoshi smiled. He was going to be a hero. He was going to show all those people that called him a villain for all those years. But most importantly, he was going to be a hero for Izuku. "Welcome home. How was your day at work?" Hisashi heard his wife call from the kitchen. Kicking off his shoes at the front door, he walked in and placed his briefcase in one of the chairs at the dining table. He hugged his wife from behind, laying his head on her shoulder as she stirred something in a pot in front of her. "Better now that I'm home," he said as he smiled into her neck. She reached back with her free hand and placed a hand on his cheek. "Daddy!" The little girl screamed as she ran around the counter and wrapped her body around his leg. Hisashi let go of his wife and reached down to pick up his daughter. He tossed her into the air and caught her. "How's my little Inari doing?" She smiled and giggled in response. He was holding her in one of his hands when he spotted an unusual envelope sitting on the counter with the rest of the mail. "What's this?" he asked as he picked it up. "I don't know. It got mailed here by accident, but I don't know any of the neighbors with that name. I was just going to throw it away." Hisashi flipped the envelope over and froze. He carefully placed Inari on the floor. "I'm going to go change into something a little more comfortable before dinner." He walked off before his wife answered. He walked into his office and closed the door behind him. He looked at the envelope addressed to Inko Aizawa. He carefully ripped open the top of it and pulled out the disc sitting inside. Placing it on the desk in front of him, a projection shot out from it as he was removing the piece of paper also in the envelope. "Hello. I am here as a projection. Young Aizawa, I am here to share with you your results. I'd like to congratulate you on passing your written exam. You are actually the only student to pass with a 100%. Something only Nizu and very few other students over the years have done. For the future, it would be smart and beneficial if you'd put your actual name on your exams instead of inappropriate jokes. Those watching your physical exam greatly enjoyed the show you put on. If you could, can you please return the camera you took? Other than that, I'd like to congratulate you. Welcome to UA." A tear rolled down Hisashi's face. The projection ended and all might disappeared. He looked at the paper, but it was just basic information. "You are in Class 1C. Submit your uniform size as soon as possible. Everything for your dorm to be sent to this address." Hisashi crumbled up the paper and grabbed the disc and furiously tossed them in the garbage. That could have been Izuku if he wasn't such a worthless child. Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku Became the Most Feared Villain? We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Toast the Spaghetti in the Oven for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.